regarding Winston Churchill's views on science, technology, and the future. I offer you excerpts from my 1931 speech entitled 50 Years Hence. The great mass of human beings absorbed in the toils, cares, and activities of life, not only dimly conscious of the pace at which mankind has begun to travel. Do we look back 100 years and see that great changes have taken place? We look back 50 years and see that the speed is constantly quickening. This present century has witnessed an enormous revolution in material things, in political institutions, in manners and customs. The greatest change of all is perhaps the least perceptible by individuals. It is the far greater numbers which in every civilized country they participate in the fuller life of man. In those days, said Disraeli, writing at the beginning of the 19th century, England was for the few and the very few. The twice 2,000 for whom, wrote Byron, the world is made have given place to many millions for whom existence has become larger, safer, more varied, more full of hope and choice. In the United States, scores of millions have lifted themselves above primary necessities and aspire to culture, at least for their children. Europe, though stunned and lacerated by Armageddon, presents a similar, if less general, advance. We all take the modern conveniences and facilities as they are offered to us without being grateful or consciously happier. But we simply could not live if they were taken away. We assume that progress will be constant. This here progress, Mr. H.G. Wells makes one of his characters say, it keeps going on. It's wonderful how it keeps going on. It's also very fortunate, sir, how it keeps going on. But if it stopped, but if it were reversed, there would be the catastrophe of unimaginable horror. Mankind has gone too far to go back, and it is moving too fast to stop. There are too many people maintained, not merely in comfort, but in existence by processes unknown a century ago, for us to afford even a temporary check, still less a general setback, without experiencing calamity in its most frightful form. When we look back beyond 100 years over the long trails of history, we see immediately why the age we live in differs from all other ages in the human annals. Mankind has sometimes traveled forwards and sometimes backwards, or has stood still for hundreds of years. In China and India, it has remained stationary for thousands of years. What is it that has produced this new prodigious speed of man? It is science. Science is the cause. Her once feeble vanguards, often trampled down, often perishing in isolation, have now become a vast, organized, united class conscious army, marching forward upon all fronts towards objectives none may measure or define. It is a proud, ambitious army which cares nothing for all the laws that men have made, nothing for their most time-honored customs, or most dearly cherished beliefs, or deepest instincts. It is the power called science, which has laid hold of us, conscripted us into its regiments and batteries, set us to work upon its highways and its arsenals, rewarded us for our services, healed us when we were wounded, trained us when we were young, and pensioned us when we were worn out. None of the generations of men before the last 2 or 3 were ever gripped for good or ill and handled like this. We can seek a period in the past whose conditions resemble as closely as possible those of our day, and presume that the sequel to that period will, save for some minor alterations, be repeated. Secondly, we can survey the general course of development in our immediate past and endeavor to prolong it into the near future. The first is the method of the historian, the second is that of a scientist, and only the second is open to us now. And this only in a partial sphere. By observing all that science has achieved in modern times, and the knowledge and power now in her possession, we can predict with some assurance the inventions and discoveries which will govern our future. We can but guess, peering through a glass darkly, what reactions these discoveries and their applications will produce upon the habits, the outlook, and the spirit of man. There is no doubt that this evolution will continue at an increasing rate. We know enough to be sure that the scientific achievements of the next 50 years will be far greater, more rapid, and more surprising than those we have already experienced. It is therefore above all things important that the moral philosophy and the spiritual conceptions of men and their nations should hold their own amid these formidable scientific evolutions.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2015 awards. Here's the Churchill Club CEO, Karen Tucker.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Welcome to the 5th Annual CHURCHILLS. When you are acknowledging excellence with an award called a Churchill, what does that mean? In a world filled with awards, Oscars, Emmys, Ig Nobel, the Raspberry, this is not about self-congratulation. We envision that the Churchills will not only reflect the brilliance, imagination, and drive of our honorees, but also serve to inspire the next round. We hope to see all of you on this stage in the future inspired or fortified in even some small measure by what you hear and see tonight. And it's important to remember that these awards are a reflection of our own aspirations and acknowledgments. There's no secret committee who selects our honorees. There is, however, a group of over 700 industry leaders from all walks of the innovation industry. And that group is you. You collectively nominated hundreds of worthy candidates for these honors, and you helped us hone in on tonight's 4 awardees. So this is why we call you our Academy, and there is simply no way that we could produce the Churchills without you. We wish to express our thanks to our sponsor, partner, and member, Shell. We know from working with the great people at Shell over the last 5 years how deeply they care about the values and themes associated with these awards. We also want to thank Accenture, McKinsey, Siemens, and Proofpoint for their support and presenting the awards, and to ThoughtWorks, our inspiration leader, Global Logic, Silicon Valley Bank, our valued supporters. Thank you for making tonight possible. Thank you. And I personally owe a huge debt of gratitude to the amazing Churchill Club team. You might have noticed that there is art in the room tonight. Led by the artist Pam Davis, there is a visual art performance piece happening in the background. It is called Draw the Feeling. Through specifically created software, she and her drawing orchestra are capturing fleeting examples of facial expressions and emotions. that rapidly cross our faces as rapidly as even half a second or a 15th of a second, and turning them into incredible drawings. Seeing and recognizing these micro-expressions on a very deep level can serve to humanize the unknown and remind us of our basic connections across any artificial divide. The work created tonight is not easy to do. It has never been done before. You can see the results of the performance piece after the program. For our tweeters, hashtag Churchill Club. And it's a big honor to introduce Geoffrey Moore. He is a legend in the industry, and he continues to make enduring contributions to help us better understand and capitalize on disruptive technologies. Geoffrey, give him your warmest possible welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Geoffrey.
Okay. Well, it's very exciting to be here again tonight and to participate in the award process here. You know, so this is Silicon Valley, and the world tends to come here to see what's going on. We have become an epicenter of technology and innovation. We've had a remarkable track record. One of the things that's kind of fun about the next generation, though, is it looks at you and says, so what? You know, what is this really all about? And for a long time, it was like, are you kidding me? We're making a fortune in this valley. I mean, come on. This is about return on invested capital. But they said, well, time on. You know, I think we over-rotated to return on invested capital. I think the world is sending us a message in many different parts of the world saying, look, return on invested capital is fine. You make money. It's important to do that. But what about return on human capital? And if you were listening to Winston Churchill and his remarks about participating in a fuller life, if you listen to Karen talking about the inspiration, this whole event is about return on human capital in the process of also creating return on invested capital. But as we look at the awards, I just would love you to think about each one of these awards in terms of that return on human capital. So the first one is Global Benefactor, and the phrase here is, for irrepressible vision and positive impact on society. Irrepressible vision. It's a really neat form of energy. Irrepressible vision. And it's part of the spirit, it's the best spirit that we have of innovation here. And positive impact on society. And increasingly we're seeing the tech sector saying, I want to give back. That's part of the motion. I don't want to have, make money over here and do philanthropy over there. I want it to be integrated. I want to have an impact. And you're going to hear about someone tonight who has had a huge impact through technology. The next one is called Magical Team. And the words here are, for collaborative breakthroughs that resulted in an irresistible product or service. Collaborative breakthroughs is a kind of a... It's a key spirit to this world. For a long time, tech was perceived as an individualist play. It was Einstein, it was Edison, it was the individual genius. And part of what's come out of the Valley, and part of the last 10 years and 15 years, I would say even more so, is a collaborative fabric, a sense that the magic happens between people, among people, across a network. We talk a lot more now about network effects. And it's that spirit. How do you get that thing going? And we're gonna talk to a magical team representative tonight. And the phrases, by the way, the one for Global Benefactor, the one I love. Thanks for thinking big, and that's one of the things that's wonderful about technology. It scales benefactory or benefacts. It scales philanthropy and whatnot in a way that we never could before. And the one with magical teams is you guys nailed it. And nailing it is a very, very beautiful experience. It doesn't happen very often in your life, but when it does happen, it's like, this is the best. I want to do this over and over again. And then the third one's game changer. And the phrase here is, for indispensable technology and innovation, and the words behind it are, you changed how things are done or viewed, and there's no going back. And you just think about how many things we've absorbed, as we go from systems of record to systems of engagement to systems of intelligence, as we go from cloud to mobile to social to data science to Internet of Things. The landscape keeps changing over and over and over again. And we're bringing that, but we need to bring that fabric to human capital, not just to invested capital. And finally, legendary leader, and we're going to be honored tonight with a very special legendary leader, for inspirational leadership and contributions to others' innovation and success. And again, the inspirational leadership, the sense that all of what we're trying to get done here, it's not a process. There's a bunch of folks that will come here and say, well, what is the process for innovation? And there's some process lessons. It's not that you couldn't have process, but that's not the point. The point is that there is a spiritual, an emotional, a magic that's part of the game. And that's what we're trying to ignite here. And so this is an award ceremony, but it's not really an award ceremony in the sense that what you'll see tonight is the award's going to take about 3 minutes. And then we're going to have a conversation for about 15 minutes. And that's roughly the proportion of value. It's 3 minutes for the award, and it's 15 minutes to start the conversation. And the conversation will start in these 2 white chairs, but it's like a match. It's intended to light a flame. It's intended to start a dialogue that keeps going, that resonates and keeps going throughout the year. And that's really the purpose of the Churchill Awards, to bring the critical ideas and insights, and you're going to hear some very special ones tonight, and then to say, okay, how do I take that forward? How do I use that in my life? So with that thought in mind, I want to kick off the ceremony tonight. And so as I said, the first award of the evening is the Global Benefactor Award. Please welcome to the stage Janaki Akella of McKinsey & Company. Janaki? Oh, here we are. I think that I'm nice to see you. I'll just sit over here.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Good evening. I'm Janaki Akella, principal at McKinsey & Company. Delighted to be here tonight to honor the 2015 Global Benefactor Award. The Global Benefactor Award recognition is about stepping forward. It's about contributing to the betterment of society and the world around us. This is a theme that particularly resonates with us at McKinsey. We firmly believe that we can and we should make a difference and address the important issues in the communities that we live in. And we believe in focusing our efforts on where we can have the most impact. So when the announcement came that Churchill was recognizing Elizabeth Holmes to receive this award, we could not be more delighted and excited. Elizabeth, you're courageous, and you've devoted yourself to making a real difference. Elizabeth, we are honored here to present to you the 2015 Global Benefactor Churchill Award. Thank you for thinking big.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I'm incredibly humbled to be here, to be recognized with this award, and it's really special to me to be back here. I used to come here when I was starting this company and give my business card to people who would come up and talk to me, and it's been an amazing journey over the last 12 years as we've built this, and it's very special to be here with Channing, who played a huge role in my life then and now as we build this company.
Now, I suppose you think Elizabeth and I do this all the time. Actually, this is the first time since we started the company over almost 13 years ago that either of us has appeared together in public to say anything. And neither of us has any idea how this is going to work out. So when Elizabeth told me about this wonderful award from the Churchill Club, I went online to find out what was said about this Global Benefactor Award. And as you heard, it's a person with irrepressible vision The vision part is pretty straightforward. It's seeing something others don't see and making that happen. It's the irrepressible, which if you look up that meaning, it's uncontainable, unquenchable, unstoppable, undying. You put that together with vision and you have Elizabeth Holmes. And I was trying to think about how I could communicate my own experience with Elizabeth to have seen in her irrepressible vision. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. So let me wind the clock back to 2002. I'm starting my 33rd year of teaching chemical engineering at Stanford. I go into a class I'm teaching on advanced drug delivery systems. It's capped at 16. I had about 70 students apply. 16 students are there. I give the first lecture, tell them what the class is going to be like. And they get up and leave, and there's this young lady sitting in the back. And I get up and I said, who are you? And she says, well, I'm Elizabeth Holmes. I said, are you in the class? She says, no, I'm a freshman, and this is a sophomore seminar. I said, yeah, that's right, so you can't be in the class. She looked at me with these steely blue eyes and said, I need to be in this class. It wasn't like, can I be in? Please let me in. I need to be in this class. I said, well, that's not going to work out. All right, then I'll sit in the back of the class. I said, okay, you can do that. And believe it or not, the next week, one of the students drops out. So I have an opening. Elizabeth comes in as a freshman into this sophomore seminar. And I begin to see what was an amazing unfolding in terms of her intellect, her energy, her drive, her motivation. Here she is as a freshman, sort of taking over this class of sophomores. And halfway through the quarter, I find her sitting outside my office on the floor. I said, why are you sitting on the floor? She says, I'm waiting for you. I said, well, I have office hours. She says, I don't have time. I need to talk to you now. And I said, what about? She says, I need to work in your lab. I said, Elizabeth, you're a freshman. You're just sort of barely out of high school. And she says, I need to work in your lab. I said, well, let me think about it. The next day comes. Come to my office. She's sitting on the floor outside my door. I can't get in. I have to crawl over her. And she says, have you made up your mind? I need to be in your lab. This went on for weeks, because we were going to now outlast each other. I gave in. Irrepressible, right? This is starting to make some sense. She came into the lab, put her in with one of my graduate students and another undergraduate, and we would meet once a week and talk about the research. It became pretty evident that Elizabeth was now driving the research. At the end of that first year, she said, you have some students that have gone to Singapore. There's a Genome Institute. I need to go to the Genome Institute. I need to learn about nucleic acids. And I said, Elizabeth, it's really nationalistic. They speak Mandarin there. She looked at me and says, I'm fluent in Mandarin. Well, so she went. She comes back. Sophomore year. She comes back in September and she's got a big sheaf of papers in her hand. I says, what's that? And she says, it's a patent application. I said, okay, what should I do with this? Yeah, I want you to read it. So I read it. And she, what do you think? I said, well, it's pretty incredible what you've put down here. And she says, good, let's start a company. You're 19 years old. She looked at me and she goes, so what? I said, well, you should finish your degree. Get your chemical engineering degree. And she went, why? And I just didn't have an answer to that. So we started the company. So that's irrepressible vision. And so I'd like Elizabeth to share with you, what was it in your life's experience that led up to harassing me for a year and a half, that that caused you to see so far into the future about what was needed and required to begin to think about how one might revolutionize healthcare as we know it? There must have been some personal experiences in your life that caused you to focus in on this vision.
You told my whole history now. Yeah, I've always believed that there's such an incredible legacy here in Silicon Valley around building products that can make a difference in the world and around the ability to do well by doing good. And I started Theranos with the belief that we could build something that would change what so many of us have gone through, which is that when we lose people we love, there's nothing that we wouldn't do to change what we go through in those moments, wondering, what if I had known sooner, and what if I'd been able to do something? And we spent a lot of time thinking about what is the difference that we strive to make in the world. And for us, it's about this belief that individuals have a basic human right to access health information. And we live in a society in which it's illegal in most states in the United States for individuals to even be able to order their own lab tests or get access to their own health information. And when you think about the fact that most of the time we're finding out people are really, really sick once a disease has already progressed, it becomes very clear that we need to redefine the paradigm of diagnosis, which, if you look up in a dictionary, will say to determine the presence of disease from symptoms, to one in which we're looking at the onset of disease in time for therapy to be effective. And for me, I know what that means at a personal level, and there's nothing that I want to do with my life more than trying to change that.
And you had... I remember you telling me you had some direct experience with family members who just went way before their time, and you really wanted to address that. Is that where this vision just took hold?
Yeah, I spent a long time. My parents were in public service, and I thought that was what I was going to do. But I began to believe that business could be a vehicle for making a change, and a vehicle in which you have total control over the outcomes. And I've watched people in my own family go from the process of spending too much time at the beach and all of a sudden having skin cancer, and all of a sudden the skin cancer becomes brain cancer, and it's in their bones. And it's an amazing concept that as a society we're actually detecting cancer by physical tumors that have already grown inside you, when at a physiological level there's so much happening so much earlier in the process that we're not even measuring. And I think there's incredible opportunity to shift that paradigm.
So with that vision in mind, she takes my PhD student and the other undergraduate, gets them to work for her in a basement. This is a real Silicon Valley story. And begin putting some meat on this skeleton of the vision. Now, there's blood testing laboratories all over. We all have our blood drawn and tested. So what is it in taking your vision and putting it to work in a very real sense? How is that different from what anybody else has done before?
We think that the answer to a lot of these challenges that we're talking about in healthcare lies in the individual. And we think that individual engagement in healthcare is critical to changing outcomes and changing costs. But healthcare is perhaps the only industry in which individuals have no ability to engage in the price or quality of their service. If you think about in the early 80s, if it had been said that PCs could only be sold between enterprises and the government, and consumers were not allowed to buy a PC, we never would have seen the same demand for better quality, lower cost products that fueled such innovation in the industry and healthcare. The consumer plays no role in demanding better quality, lower cost products. And so we have spent a huge amount of time focusing on how do you make these services wonderful? And how do you approach this from a technology perspective where if we can make something better or if we can turn a test around 10 minutes faster, it doesn't affect a clinical outcome, but it's a better product. And how do we create an experience where someone comes in to do a lab test and walks out thinking, this was wonderful, and really enjoys the experience and wants to come back and do it again? And that's just not the paradigm that we live in for certainly lab testing and a lot of other healthcare experiences. And so we've worked to build an infrastructure and an ecosystem in which we can make it possible to have something like lab testing become a wonderful experience that people enjoy. And there's so much that goes into that, which ranges from transparency around pricing that can actually begin to engage the individual in understanding how much they're agreeing to pay for a service, and then using that information to demand lower cost products from other providers, all the way through to the actual environment and ecosystem in which you're providing the product or service, which there's just so much room to redefine that experience.
I remember her telling me all this, because none of you are going to run out after this to go get a blood draw. I mean, that's just not something that you do to have a good time. And so, how does this happen? And I remember asking her, how does this happen? And she says, let's do it on a drop of blood from a finger prick. And I can tell you that I questioned that, whether that could be done. Can you actually do 30 or 40 or 50 tests on a drop of blood? 50 miles, 1,000 times less volume than 5,000 times less volume that is typically done. And her view was just, we'll do it. We'll make it happen. Is there some law of physics that says we can't do that? And I remember calling up some friends of mine that I had been in companies with before. It was sort of like Ocean's 11. I call them, let's try one more time. We've got something cooking here. We weren't going to rob a bank, but we were going to try to do this on a little tiny drop of blood. And it's her vision and her persistence that has made this come to be reality today, coupled with, as she said, the costs, which are much, much lower, the transparency in making this available to everyone. So you've now had this vision, you've now built the technology that surrounds this, and it's out and becoming available. Part of this award you've received is about impact. What impact have you seen that that you're having and that the company is having on people's lives? How do you measure that? How do you gauge it? What do you hear?
I think a huge part of it is around cost. We're still living in a world in which most people, even if they have insurance, have deductibles that are so high that they actually can't afford many of the healthcare services that they need. And the ability to make testing available at an incredibly low cost, $2 for a blood test, changes what people, especially in low-income areas, can do in terms of accessing their health information. And it's been incredibly humbling to see what it means to people who were never able to get tested before to come in and do that for the first time. I think, too, so much of our work in advocating for this movement around preventive medicine has resulted in things like the law we were able to pass in Arizona this year, which for the first time in our country gives individuals the right to order their own lab tests without having to get an order. And it's been amazing to see what that means for people in terms of all of a sudden having the ability to engage with their own health information, and how that changes the relationship with the physician in terms of more engagement around preventive care. And I think a lot of it, too, in terms of our aspirations and what we want to do is we've begun to create an experience that can change what it means for a cancer patient, for example, to go through the blood testing process. And there's so much pain and suffering that goes into that right now in the context of, I know so many people who can take the chemo or take the treatments, but the way that they have to do these blood draws over and over again just breaks them down, and it breaks down the people who love and care for them. And moving towards smaller samples is just transformative in the context of that process. So that's why we do what we do.
And you get emails. You get emails from people who have experienced this. I remember you telling me one about the disabled fellow without any limbs. Why don't you share that story, because I think it's very touching.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing as you build these products, you never anticipate the ways in which they can be applied. And when we first started our work in Arizona, we had a man who had 4 amputations come in to one of our wellness centers, and he asked if he could do a finger stick, and he didn't have any fingers. And so our technicians called our lab, and he had a nub near where one of his elbows would be, and they were able to draw blood. And when he got the sample, he started crying, because he said that up until that point in time, he'd had to have needles in his neck in order to draw his blood sample. And it was such a transformative moment for me, because I remember driving home that day and thinking, this one person's life is better because of what we've done. And for us and for me, I really believe that's the purpose of why we do everything that we do, because every single day we can apply technology toward making a difference.
So I was always, now, of course, Elizabeth was in my lab. Now I'm in her lab. The tables of, the whole thing about the golden pond of my retirement, that ship sunk a few years ago. And I'm having a blast in this new sandbox. And Elizabeth, when these testimonials come in, she sends them to everyone in the company on email. And it really warms the spirit. As I was telling somebody today, the biggest problem is telling people to go home from work. They just all are in there with their oars in the water. It's an incredible sight to see. So impact has a lot of different dimensions. And one I would like to hear your views on is the impact that clearly you are having on girls and women in science, technology, engineering, and medicine, because it's really phenomenal. Talk to us about that and how you view that, and how you hope to be an agent of change in bringing more women, girls into science and technology.
I think we're at an incredible time where there's a real opportunity to create a stereotype around little girls being able to pursue and be the best in engineering and science and math. And I think the more women who are succeeding in technology companies and demonstrating for their daughters that they can excel in these fields and be wonderful mothers, the more we change this paradigm. And it's been an incredible privilege in our company to try to create a proof point for that. But I think it's also incredibly important as a society that we fuel that stereotype with our little girls because we lose it so often as people go through the education process. And I remember an amazing conversation with the head of the Girl Scouts in which she said that they got all the valedictorians of their classes in a room and asked them to raise their hand if they thought they were going to be a leader in technology business. And she said 0 girls raised their hand. And they were shocked because these girls were valedictorians of their class. And as they looked at it, she said they concluded that there weren't role models where the girls could see themselves in those roles. And I think, in Silicon Valley, we have such an incredible opportunity to create role models, and it's the women who are succeeding in companies all throughout the valleys that are doing that. And the more we can talk about that and make that become part of our culture, the more I think will affect the choices that are made in high school and before high school about how people want to self-identify.
So this has been a pretty incredible experience for the two of us. I don't think either of us thought we'd be where we are today. 13 years ago, sitting around a desk where there was Elizabeth and myself and 2 other people, that it would come to this. And so there's a magic in this. And it's really hard to get your arms around. And I've been involved myself with a number of startups where I could see there was no magic. And you sort of know it when you see it and you feel it. So another part of this award, the Global Benefactor Award, a benefactor in the most base sense is somebody who helps others. And this is Elizabeth. And all the years I've been with her, what has driven her to drive this company is to help others. And I wonder, Elizabeth, can you share that little inner part of yourself that drives that, so perhaps other young entrepreneurs out here in the audience can see that distinction between helping oneself and helping others?
I think there's so many people in this room who are doing that, and including the other people who are being honored tonight, who many of whom have been just an incredible inspiration to me. I really believe, in line with where we started the conversation, that when you think about the purpose of building a business or the purpose of creating a great product, in my mind, we're all here to make a difference in the world. And if we can go to sleep at night knowing that someone's life is a little bit better because of something that we did, I don't think there is a greater purpose or a greater calling. And if you're going to work the way that you have to work to be able to build something like this, knowing that it's being applied toward affecting someone's life in a very fundamental way, I think is just an incredibly rewarding experience. Because I know as I've done this, you can look back and say, well, if something happened, if I were gone tomorrow, I know I've done something that makes this world better. And I think at a philosophical level, it's just incredibly rewarding.
You can imagine what an exciting time it is to go to work at a company with a leader like Elizabeth Holmes. Thank you.
Right hat. And Elizabeth, one more time. Please. Please. Thank you. So in case you didn't need another reminder, life is not a dress rehearsal, and that's why. Moving on to the next award, which is to the magical team, Chen-Yang Xu of Siemens Technology to Business will present that award. Please welcome Chen-Yang.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Hello, I'm Chen-Yang Xu, General Manager of Siemens Technology to Business in Berkeley, one of the 3 open innovation hubs around the world working with technology startups to transform the world we live in. In any company and organization, every so often, a team or division transcends expectations and manifests a sublime product or service that takes the world by storm. It could be as elegant as great new design, or an easier form of payment. Or it could be one mega box office hit after another that raised the bar for all movies, period, and impacted millions of minds. This year's magical team honoree is a study in creativity, collaboration, learning, process, and the intersection of technology and entertainment. This team made a difference, and they absolutely nailed it. This award is particularly meaningful to Siemens. As the Siemens Disney Marketing and Technology Alliance began 10 years ago, Siemens has been a trusted technology collaborator on projects such as Toy Story Mania and Cars Land attractions at Walt Disney theme parks in the US. Projects where Pixar brought innovation to life. We're so pleased to be presenting the Churchill Club's 2015 Magical Team Award to an amazing team for collaborative breakthroughs that resulted in an irresistible product. The 2015 Magical Team Churchill goes to the Pixar Animation Studio teams. Yeah. So let's welcome Ed Catmull, President of Walt Disney and Pixar Animation Studios, who will be joined on stage for a conversation with Geoffrey Moore. Thank you. Let's come with it. Okay, very good.
To be here. This, by the way, is Ed's new book. Fellow authors like to do a lot of this. And it's called Creative Inc. And it actually came up in a conversation yesterday at Dropbox. The CEO of Dropbox, Drew Houston, was saying this book and Eric Ries's book have been just critical to the culture and success at Dropbox. So you have a big fan there. So this is called Creativity Inc. And the subtitle is Overcoming the Unseen Forces That Stand in the Way of True Inspiration, which is sort of a theme that unites us all. And I was talking with Ed before the dinner, and part of the lessons in this book are consolidated in a concept called the brain trust. Is that correct?
Yeah, the brain trust is one of our elements in the team, and we discovered it accidentally. It was our good fortune to have a group of people that worked in a phenomenal way, but it took us a few years to figure out what made it different. And it's not actually a single group of people. It's what we call a group that comes together to solve a particular problem we've got for the company, which in our case is a story for a film. And we have 4 principles that we use in this. One of them is that the director of the project is in charge and makes the final decision. Nobody in that room overrides them. And the reason for that is that if if that room can override them, or if somebody in that room can override them, then they will come into it in defensive posture. So this is a way of trying to have them be open. The second principle is related to that, is to remove the power structure from the room. So John Lasseter can be in there, I'm in there, like it doesn't matter. There is no power structure in that room. The third principle is that we share in each other's success and failures. And I mean, by example, if you can imagine two directors who are friends, and one asks for notes on the film from the other, then at that point, the one who's giving the notes has to make a mental calculation. If this is a hard note, then I may damage my friendship. And it's that mental calculation which gets in the way of telling the truth.
What's a hard note? Give me an example of a hard note.
Well, in the case of movies, there are things that are bad ideas. The idea sucks. And, you know.
Is that a hard one or a soft one?
So you've got. And they usually have specifics. So you know what you're doing doesn't work at all.
Got it.
And what happens if you're in a project, you self-identify with it, and you lose objectivity. You need somebody from the outside to help you when you're lost in something. But you don't want to hear that. So you both want to hear it, and you don't want to hear it. And it's understanding that balance, which says that if you actually have a group that has a vested interest, then you can give the hard note, but you are not putting the friendship at risk. And the least of the fourth principle is that all this is based upon giving and listening to hard notes. Now, then the question might be asked, do we live up to our own principles? And I'd have to say that in general, yes, as evidenced by the films. But every once in a while, it's a flaming disaster. And there are reasons for it. That is, people don't want to look bad. We said we remove the power structure from the room. People aren't wired that way. All right, they come in, they want to impress somebody, or they don't want to embarrass themselves, or they're grandstanding, or there are things that get in the way that are personal. And I view our job, and my job, is not to actually give the notes on the film. It's actually to look at the dynamics in the room. Are we going off the rails? Every once in a while, magic happens. And by magic, I mean that the ego is gone from the room. As ideas can come and go, and people aren't attached to those ideas. And when you get that point, it's this magical, wonderful state. And you can't always get it, but you live for those things when they happen.
So you said the director's in charge, and that's the first of the four key principles. How do you pick a director? I'm thinking about venture capitalists and CEOs, because in a venture-backed firm, the CEO is in charge in a somewhat similar way, but I'm not so sure the power structure leaves the room during a board meeting. And so there's a dynamic. I think some of the dynamics that you're talking about happen to the detriment of the firm. So how do you empower a director? What do you do if you're concerned that a director's going the wrong way? How do you manage that?
Well, the first thing is when we're starting something new, we're taking a risk on a person, which means we don't know if they're going to do it. Even if they've been side by side with somebody who's succeeded, like directed the film before, actually having the mantle isn't the same thing as being next to it, which is true in the CEO position, as you know. And you don't know until they get in the position, because they may have all sorts of skills, but they may not be able to make that switch, because they judge themselves by what they think the job should be, rather than saying, oh, this is what it is, I'm going to adapt. And that's this trigger point.
Interesting.
Now, what makes it difficult is at the beginning of the project, since it's a new idea, all of the ideas suck. So, and I don't mean that in the sense that we're being modest.
Right. They really do suck.
Or the self-effacing. Yeah, they really do suck. So, that being the case, how do you judge a team if what they're working on doesn't work?
Yeah.
And our measure is actually how well the team is working together. If they're working well together, we believe that they will fix the problem. If they're not working together, then what we'll find is the team will start to fall apart. That's actually our measure.
Interesting.
It's not what the idea is. It's whether or not they're working well together.
So if it were to start to go south, do you break up the team? Do you try to correct the team? What do you do?
Well, you go through phases. The first one is you get the warning flag to the back channel.
Right.
And everybody's trying to make them succeed. So there are helpful things you do in terms of coaching or guidance or helping, adding people to the team or replacing somebody. These are typically not well known, so if things are going wrong, people don't know what you're doing to trying to correct it. If that's not working and it gets bigger, then you'll make bigger changes. And leading to the worst thing is that it actually doesn't work and you actually do a restart on the film, which we have done.
Wow.
But when you do a restart on the film, while it's very hard, and we take it personally because it meant not only do we take a chance on somebody, but in not working out, we damage them. So this is a personal responsibility to help them as much as we can.
Wow.
But if it doesn't work out, then we've damaged the entire crew.
Yeah.
So we have responsibility to them too. So we will have a restart, and the crew knows this happens once in a while. It's very painful, but it's also a signal to them, is that we value what we're doing so much that we will make tough decisions. So when that happens, we don't have people getting all freaked out over it. In fact, what we do is when we have a problem, we see it, we always wait too long to correct it. So even if you know that they're not going to make it, if we correct it at that time, what we've just done is we've signaled to all the other leaders that if they make a mistake, that the cord can get cut. So they become fearful. So we have to wait. So we're paying a penalty now in order to get rid of the fear for future projects, because you want to reach that point at which everybody is saying, what's taking them so long? Then you do it.
Those idiots, yeah, okay.
Yeah, when I say those idiots aren't acting, that's the time
That's the time to do it. So you mentioned fear, and we talked a little bit about fear of failure earlier. Is that, when we talk about overcoming the unseen forces that get in the way of true inspiration, is it fear of failure, or what are some of the forces that get in the way?
Well, in general, I think that we're all partially deluded. And I mean that in a real sense. That is, we have successes and we draw conclusions, or we have failures and we draw conclusions. And the shallowest analysis is that when I succeeded, what I did was right. When in fact, there are a lot of things that I did wrong at the time. So you have to go down several levels to figure out what the factors were in it. In fact, you're less open to analysis if you succeed than when you are when you fail. But when it comes to failure itself, which is a very popular topic nowadays, for me, there's a major misconception, because there's one meaning of failure, which is what we all believe in, which is that you learn from failures. We've all had our failures, and it's helped make us what we are. So this is a positive academic reason, which is true. But there's another meaning, which is the one we learned in school, which was that if you fail a class, you either didn't work, you screwed up, or you're dumb. But even going into adulthood, if companies fail or if politicians fail, then there are opponents who are ready to bludgeon you with that failure. So there is a real aura of danger around failure. And we actually can't get rid of that. And the trick is to realize that both of those meanings exist simultaneously inside of us. And since they both exist, what we try to do is go beyond the academic one, which we also are supporting, and it's to make it safe. Because they don't want to fail. Nobody wants to fail. But you know what's going to happen. So the trick is, how do you make it safe so that when it does happen, it's okay?
Okay. You made an interesting comment a minute ago. You're saying it's actually in some ways easier to learn from failure than from success, because when you're successful, you assume everything you did was right. How do you've had some great successes. We talked a little bit about this. How do you debrief a success and learn from it without just patting yourself on the back and sort of reinforcing what potentially might be delusions?
Well, it's hard. We have postmortems after everything, and we'll have some that are remarkably successful postmortems. And then once we've done it, and everybody agrees that it's great, but it's like taking your medicine, is the way they perceive of it. So once they've seen how it works, the next one they game, and so the next postmortem will be a complete disaster. Because even though we have wrap parties to pat ourselves on the back, then people will use the postmortems as another reason to pat themselves on the back. So we actually have to try to do it in a different way every time to keep ahead of the gaming.
And that's kind of your job. I mean, right? I mean, you and John, I mean, you were just saying, you're not the directors. It's always somebody that works that's not you or John, correct?
Yeah, unless John's directing.
John might be the director, but not you, right?
Well, he'll direct his own films, but other than that, he's the outside force.
Okay.
And everybody needs an outside force to correct them, because you just get lost in it. Yeah. We all lose objectivity.
Yeah. This is really good. So we have a couple more minutes. In terms of kind of, look, all of us here work on teams, or most of us do. Magical team is something that we all aspire to. Some of the, if you had tips to sort of think, well, okay, so things we might look for in our team leadership that you say, wow, these are some things that you might think about because this has proved very successful for us at Pixar. Any tips to offer folks?
Well, for me, the biggest thing is that the people who come into our industries, right, are people who are really well-meaning. They want to do good. I mean, that's like the base assumption. And every once in a while you may find an exception if somebody comes in. But the general thing is they're trying to do good. And we all have these emotional components in terms of our fear and our wanting to look good. And our job is to actually realize that that's there and in the managers as well as the employees. And so we have to figure out how to remove those fears, to address them, and get the barriers out of the way. And while this is about Pixar, our experience with the Disney was that we came into a group that had utterly failed.
Wow.
And
was it demoralized?
It was demoralized, and they'd failed. And they welcomed John and I, because we've been commuting back and forth for 10 years now.
Wow.
And it took some years to get that, but we turned them around. And so you've seen things like Tangled and Frozen and Wreck-It Ralph and so forth. So phenomenally successful. They're basically the same people there who were there when they were failing.
And the 4 principles that you mentioned, are they the anchor points for that turnaround, or was it other things?
Well, actually, there were a whole bunch of things.
Okay.
So I'm talking about ones like it's gettable, but there were a number of things having to do with the way we thought about failure, the trap that people get into thinking it's about getting the process right.
So it's not about getting the process right.
No, getting the process right is important. It's not the goal. Yeah. And what had happened there was that the process people took over. And you want great process people. We have great process people. But you want the process people to understand and have the balance with the people who do different kinds of things. And healthy companies know that. It's like process people are good, but if you take a really good process person and put them in charge of the company, which happens sometimes, they could bring those values with them and push out the others. A good transition is when they say, okay, I have something broader. I appreciate the process. Getting the process right is important. It's just not the goal.
Okay. Well, listen, I think everybody here owes Pixar and you and John and Disney a huge vote of thanks, and thank you very much. We're happy to give you this award. Thanks a lot, Ed. Please, go ahead. Okay, all right. So coming up to our third award. The third award is the Game Changer. So please welcome David Redmond from Proofpoint to present that award. Devin. Sorry, Devin. Apologize. Thanks. I said Damon? Devin.
Thank you, Geoffrey. It's a pleasure to be here. What a fantastic night. I almost forgot I had to come up and do an introduction because I was so enthralled in the conversations. Let me introduce myself, Devin Redmond. I'm the co-founder and GM of Nextgate Social Media Security and Compliance, which is a division of Proofpoint. But what I want to start by saying is not all products and services are created equal. Some are nice to have, and some so significantly change the world that you can't imagine how it was before them. Today, the way we work, it's impossible to imagine our business lives without social networking. So when you think about that, what we try to bring to that environment is help companies embrace social networking, drive their adoption and growth, but still retain the security and compliance that they have to have in order to drive that adoption. It's the terrific kind of synergy around what we do in the marketplace around driving that security and compliance with our customers and partners that makes it such a pleasure to present this award. This award goes to a company that really fundamentally changes the way we work today in environments today. It changes the way professionals connect. It changes the way professionals become productive and successful out there. And it does that in a way that really allows us to drive a more personal connection across all of the people that we've worked with in those environments. So the most important thing to think about this is that this product and technology and this award goes to a company that's created an indispensable innovation around both technology and business. With that, I would like to present the 2015 Game Changer Award to LinkedIn. Accepting that on behalf of LinkedIn is Alan Blue. Joining Alan, it's going to be Susan Lund.
Over here.
Joining Alan will be Susan Lund.
Alan, it's a pleasure to be here tonight with you. LinkedIn has truly been game-changing. It's changed the way people look for a job, think about their careers, build professional, not just social networks. If you think back to when the internet was taking hold 20, 25 years ago, the first big innovation was newspaper want ads went online. So we had Monster.com, we had job aggregators, but it was still employers listing a job looking for somebody. And then you and some others came along in 2003, and you turned that on its head. So you said, let's get people to put their resumes online. Instead of people searching for jobs, let's have the jobs go search for the people. And that has been truly game-changing. I'm an economist by training. This has changed the efficiency of labor markets. It's added transparency. It's added all sorts of good attributes to how this very messy historical process of how people go about finding jobs. Earlier this year, the McKinsey Global Institute collaborated with LinkedIn on some research. And we calculated that in 10 years' time, it's possible that LinkedIn and other platforms like it could raise global GDP by $2.7 trillion per year, nearly 2%, and it could change and improve the job outcomes for 540 million people around the world every year. So that's game-changing. There's no going back, as this award was saying. LinkedIn itself, of course, has gone from a couple of guys sitting around in Reid Hoffman's living room to a company with a market cap of $26 billion. You've got nearly 400 million people around the world have now posted their profiles. It's 200 countries, 24 languages, and according to your own website, the company is growing by 2 new users every second. Now, you could be resting on your laurels, but LinkedIn is not done innovating, which is one of the amazing things about the company. You have new horizons and goals. The economic graph that was launched last year is the next big vision for LinkedIn. And this year in 2015, you've started working with cities around the United States to put more disadvantaged people to work. So let me start with the first question. Alan, tell us about the vision that led you and others to create LinkedIn and that's guided you for the 10-plus years of LinkedIn's existence.
Sure. So when we started LinkedIn, excuse me, we had in mind ourselves. So when we started the business, we were entrepreneurs, and we basically built LinkedIn so that anybody in the world could have a social network as powerful and effective as any entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. That was the basic vision behind it, and we fully expected that, excuse me, the professionals were going to come and use LinkedIn on a regular basis to do almost anything they wanted to do in their professional lives, from hire, which has been a big use case for us, but also to get information, to build sales, to create opportunities, basically to do everything which is part of the world of career and work.
So what have been some of the challenges? You started out as a Silicon Valley company, and then it expanded across the U.S. A lot of professionals use it, but today you're expanding all over the world emerging markets, you're expanding across industries beyond the Silicon Valley professionals. And what have been some of the challenges as the company has grown to be a truly global, cross-industry company?
Well, as we've grown, we've discovered what we don't know. So we've come into places where basically we don't really have a clear idea of what a particular audience needs or what a particular type of professional cares about. We can say with great confidence what a professional cares about here in Silicon Valley, and we can even say with pretty good confidence what one wants in New York or maybe Berlin, but we can't say what a pipe fitter wants in Shanghai. We just don't have knowledge about what that is yet. So as we grow and as more people come into the network, we learn more and more about the world of work.
Yeah. And how is the world of work changing?
It's changing so quickly. Let me give you an example. About 30 years ago, this is right about it's about 30 years ago, maybe even a little longer than that. Basically, the purchasing power, the economic power of somebody who's working in the manufacturing industry in the U.S. basically came to its historical peak. So if you were working in a factory, basically you made as much money, you had as much ability to control your own destiny in 1974 as you have today, which is a pretty remarkable thing. Through the forces of globalization and technology, it's changed that whole picture for a gigantic collection of the people who work today. Those forces have basically created a quickly accelerating professional and technical class and huge service industries with a huge gap in between them. We talk about the skills gap. We talk about the possibilities that there are people out there who aren't ready to jump into the world of work. It's a real thing. And that's one of the major forces that we see out there, which has changed the way the economy and certainly the way it affects people's lives in the last few years.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the comments at the beginning of this program was about companies starting to think about return on human capital rather than invested capital. One of the striking things in the research that we did together was a survey of LinkedIn members around the world, asking people if they felt like their current employment had them engaged and challenged and was fully utilizing their capabilities. And almost a majority of people in every country said no. And that's pretty stunning when you think about the mismatch. And we know from reams of studies of human resources and companies that if people aren't engaged in their work, they don't try hard, they're not productive. So today, there are a tremendous amount of people, even employed people, who are simply not engaged in work. How is LinkedIn thinking about trying to change this conundrum?
Well, so LinkedIn, like many of the technologies which have been part of the last 15 years, say, of Internet, have changed the power that any given individual has. Once upon a time, basically, we all worked for a company, and the company kind of had control over what our fate looked like. But having tools in your hands, having your cell phone, which gives you access to so much information that basically, even 20 years ago, the President of the United States didn't have, give you access to payment mechanisms and tools, the individual has become tremendously powerful relative to where they were 10 years ago. This is the promise of the consumer internet. That means that people have expectations they can do that in the world of work. They really believe that they can make choices. They can have opportunities to do what they want, to find something that really works for them. So at LinkedIn, we are always first about helping the individual succeed. Before we're about the company, before we're about the school, the organization, the individual has to come first because it's the individual who's now writing the rules of the modern economy.
Yeah. It's fascinating. So LinkedIn is sitting on this tremendous amount of data that literally makes my mouth water. One of the interesting things they've done with it in the last year is started to look at university performance of graduates based on where people get jobs. And they've come up with a top 10, top 20 list of places to go if you want to be an accountant or in marketing or in sales or in high tech. And, usually 2 of the top 10 would be the colleges you'd suspect. It's Harvard or Stanford or the like. And then the other 8 are places you would never think about. It's University of Indiana or Kansas or Missouri. What are you doing with some of this data that LinkedIn has to bring transparency to people making choices about careers, career paths, students trying to decide where to go to school, what to invest in?
Yeah, so I think the education stuff is a great example because we basically started by building up a graph of people, and then we added schools, we added companies, we added skills, we added a ton of things. We call this the economic graph. And when you step back and look at it from a distance, you can tell all kinds of interesting things about the trends that actually make up the economy. And one of them is this idea on a personal basis to be able to say, hey, actually, these are the best schools that I could go choose. So earlier this year, we partnered with New York City and basically are providing them a whole bunch of aggregated data which helps the mayor and his team pick the schools which are producing the best technology results in New York, mechanisms by which they can figure out which skills are actually required in the city. How do they keep more talent there? How should the City University of New York choose its curriculum in terms of the things they actually teach? That kind of information actually makes it possible to make much better and more data-driven choices about how you govern, how you run your company, how you run your school. Those are ways in which we believe we can have some of the impact you were talking about.
Yeah. That's great. Tell us more about what you're doing with the Markle Foundation. They have an initiative called Rework America, and it's about using technology to put disadvantaged people into the workforce and giving them the skills that they need and the jobs. And I know LinkedIn is partnering now with a couple cities and states to try to make this a reality.
Yeah, it's interesting. So one of the challenges we faced over time is as we've grown, we've gotten more people who are not professionals, but what we call middle skill or high skill workers coming into LinkedIn. And the interesting thing is we've already got employers who are there. When we were talking at the table about Pacific Gas and Electric and a few others who are seeing really major changes in the way they can hire. PG&E thinks that about 50% of their employees are going to retire in the next 10 years. 50%. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they aren't able to bring people in at the entry level anymore because they can't find people with those skills. Alcoa, when we talked to them, said that there are currently 600,000 open jobs in the world of advanced manufacturing. And that number is going to grow to 4 million by 2025. Okay? That is a huge amount of opportunity. And the great thing about it is that every single one of those jobs is a job with a big future. It's not like it's going to a place where you're going to do retail and you may stay that way for the rest of your life. If you become a welder on an oil rig, your starting salary is $100,000 a year, which is a remarkable start for somebody who could theoretically get there quickly right after high school. So what we're doing in Phoenix and Colorado with the Markle Foundation is we're trying to create a system where we can marry education together with jobs so that those people who come out with that high school education not only see the job they might want to take, but also have direct access to the education they need in order to be able to get that job. And we think if we can make it work in those places, we can make it work anywhere. And if we can make it work anywhere, I hope we can finally make some progress on closing that skills gap, basically by making all of this available and by helping the companies, the schools, and the people work together.
Yeah. That's a powerful vision. When we think about technology and jobs, the first thing most people think about is automation of jobs. We don't have any more jobs. There aren't jobs. And what I love about LinkedIn is this idea that we're bringing technology as part of the solution to making people understand the skills they need, what they need to do, and how to get a career. Let's turn really quickly to you because you have such a unique background. Alan started out in drama and spent the first couple years of his career in theatrical lighting and set design. Somehow you made it into the tech world, and now you've had this incredible journey seeing LinkedIn from concept to what it's become today. What are the things you're going to take away from this whole experience, besides, of course, the money?
So I think, so one of the amazing things, I know many people in the room have had this experience because a lot of you are entrepreneurs and have done amazing things. But the thing I'm going to take away is that fearlessness that you can actually go out and do anything. It's actually having gone and built something which is really successful leads you to believe that you could do it, that in fact anybody could do it. So all those fears I know I used to have about, am I going to be able to do something good or something interesting or whatever, I now know it's possible. And I know that, we didn't start with a huge amount, and we were able to make great things, and I know that's possible for anybody. It makes me very optimistic.
Thank you. So let me close. I've been asked to ask you about your call to action. LinkedIn is changing the way people find jobs. It's trying to expand opportunity and make it more clear for what people should do. You've built this incredible company. Everyone in this room we're sitting here in Silicon Valley, tremendous brain power, tremendous energy and drive. What's your call to action to those in this room to actually go out and change the world in a game-changing way?
So I did give this a little bit of thought. That idea that we're trying to make work in Phoenix and Arizona, this idea that basically we could create a kind of a new education system which basically encourages people to go directly out of high school through the training they need and into a great career. Skipping some of the more traditional education which is out there, which isn't really closely aligned with career outcomes. There's a great organization that LinkedIn has worked with really closely. It's called Year Up. Has anybody heard of Year Up? Some of you might have heard Year Up. Year Up is an amazing org. What they do is they take what is termed opportunity youth. In other words, basically kids from high school who don't have a lot of likelihood to go to college. And they put them into a 1-year internship at a tech company. And basically, that person becomes an IT specialist during that period of time, during that 1 year up. And then they get hired at an absolutely amazing rate into Silicon Valley. As a matter of fact, right now, we've had 60 or 70 of the internships run at LinkedIn. We've hired 30 of those people to be full-time employees after they actually went through the internship. And the rest of them have become people who work at Facebook, or people who work at Twitter, or people who work at Google. So it's actually been an amazing story. I think that the thing I would call on people here to do, because you all work for companies which can make choices about where you actually hire, is think about some of these alternative mechanisms by which people can find training and work. Think about the Year Up. Think about coding boot camps. Think about interesting new academies, alternative mechanisms for training. Don't always just rely on that bachelor's degree. And when you find a system that works for you, when you find some place that you'd be willing to hire over and over again, like we have with Year Up, you got to tell people about it. Because every time you talk about a system that works, you give that system the reputation it needs to attract students. And every time it attracts students, it produces better results. Every time it produces better results, it produces pressure on an education system to make the whole thing better. So I would start close by with your hiring, say, what could we do out there to maybe try some different paths, some different pathways for people to come work for us? And that can get the ball rolling to a revolution in education.
Okay, and now we come to our final award of the evening. It's the Legendary Leader Award. Let's welcome Salim John Mohammed of Accenture, who will tee up that award. Salim?
Thanks, Geoffrey. Hello, I'm Salim John Mohammed, Senior Managing Director at Accenture. I'd like to start by congratulating the Churchill Club for their leadership and for continuing these game-changing programs, which together create an amazing. I'd like to start by congratulating the Churchill Club for their leadership and for continuing to offer these game-changing programs, which bring together an amazing group of industry leaders. We're thrilled to be part of this. The Legendary Leader Award is about inspirational leadership and its contribution to the innovation of others' success. When the Churchill Club asked its Academy to nominate honorees for this award, they asked them to identify people who have seen and envisioned a brand new future, people who frame industry and societal needs and create solutions in a way that is uniquely their own. Of equal importance is the ability to recognize and develop talent and to catalyze great teams. We asked the legendary leader who has had enormous impact on the industry he or she served, and through the contributions of the people they helped along the way. On behalf of Accenture, I'm so pleased to be here this evening and to have the distinct privilege of announcing that the 2015 Legendary Leader Award goes to Andy Grove, former chairman and CEO of Intel. Let me welcome to the stage Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz, who will be speaking on Andy's behalf tonight.
Thank you so much. There couldn't be a more aptly named award, I don't think. And we thought the best way to talk about a legendary leader would be through the eyes of his followers. So we're going to start with a video that takes us through some of the highlights of Andy's careers. Then I'm going to give my perspective on what he meant to me. And then we're going to show a final video with some other of Andy's many, many followers telling what he meant to them.
You have something of a kind of a team approach within Intel, don't you?
Very much so.
How does that work?
Can I butt in and ask you to pronounce it Intel?
Intel? What did I say?
Intel.
Intel. I stand corrected. I thank you very much. Yes. Thank you.
The company was started in 1968 at a time when it appeared that what at that point wasn't yet named LSI technology, silicon technology, has reached a level capable of putting a substantial amount of function onto a given chip.
The critical point that we defined where this transformation is ripe for action is what we like to call the strategic inflection point, where the forces have spoken up, they showed up, they presented themselves, and it's not too late yet. You probably realize that today is National Depression Screening Day. And one of the aspects of National Depression Screening Day is that no one needs to suffer in silence.
Thank you, Terry Murphy, for putting that video together. It is what amazing memories. So I read a tweet the other day, and it said, the greatest thing about Silicon Valley's culture is that you can ask someone for help, and they'll help you and won't expect anything in return. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that's really, really interesting, and in two ways. First, there aren't other business cultures that are like that. So if you think about Hollywood or Wall Street, you can ask someone for help, but the idea that you would get connections or advice or help and not have to pay that back, that's just not happening there. But the second thing, and even more importantly, is it's really fundamental to what Silicon Valley is, because Silicon Valley is fueled by new ideas. And new ideas generally come from new people, and new people often have nothing. And they come without anything, and the fact that they can get help and get help at no cost and get on their way is the thing that makes this the ecosystem for invention that's better than anywhere else in the world. And so I was thinking about that, and I thought, where did that come from? How do you get to a culture that's really, in a lot of ways, not in the kind of existing people's self-interest? How did that start? And I know how it started for me. Because when I got here in the late 80s, I really wanted to do something. I wanted to be like Elizabeth Holmes. I wanted to be great like that. I wanted to do something and be a leader. But at that time, there really was very little to go on. The internet, the World Wide Web wasn't around yet. And there were no blogs. And there were no TED Talks. And there was no way to learn this stuff. And most of the people in the industry were self-taught. And I knew from working for them that they weren't very good teachers or students. So when somebody told me that there was a book that taught all the nuts and bolts and everything you really needed to know how to build and run an organization, I was very excited about it. And they said, the name of this book is High Output Management. I said, well, who wrote it? And they said, Andy Grove. And I was completely shocked. I said, Andy Grove, like the Andy Grove, took time out from running Intel to write a book that is going to teach me how to manage and how to be a leader? And they're like, yes, you have to get it. And you have to understand, at this time, Intel was the company, not just in Silicon Valley, but in technology. It was completely legendary and had gotten to its perch on top of the industry, not through like one lucky idea or like a burst of inspiration that just carried it, but through an amazing story. They were one of Silicon Valley's very first startups, and through the years, they had to completely change their business under Andy from being in the memory business, which was under incredible attack, not just by Japanese business competitors, but by the Japanese government itself funding those competitors, to underprice Intel, which forced it very late in its life to switch into the microprocessor business, which ended up being a far bigger business than the memory business ever was. And, it became like the company, and at the helm was Andy. And Andy was the legendary figure of all times in Silicon Valley, and a lot of it came from where he started. So we all knew that he came from Budapest, Hungary. And he came from Budapest, Hungary as a Jew. Budapest! As a Jew, at a time when first the Nazis, then the Soviet communists occupied Hungary, and his family was threatened, and he was threatened to the point where, even as one of the most promising students in Budapest, he had to escape and leave the country. And there were all kinds of great stories in Silicon Valley about how he did that, and a lot of them probably weren't true, about leaping over barbed wire fences and throwing grenades at Russian tanks and whatnot. But what was true is, as a teenager, he got on a boat by himself and sailed on a very long journey, scary journey, to New York. And he arrived in New York as a kid with no money, no other people around him, and really almost no knowledge of English, and enrolled himself in CCNY. Took physics, probably the hardest first class you could imagine, particularly if you didn't know English. Immediately flunked his first test because he didn't know English, but then learned English and physics, and got an A on the next test, and went on to get a PhD in physics from UC Berkeley, and then write a book on semiconductors that ended up being a very important book in English. And then he launched Intel and became CEO of Intel, and this was the guy this guy who had built that company, and you saw he was Time Magazine Man of the Year in 1997 because of his impossible and amazing journey. And he had written this book, not a book about how great he was or how great Intel was or any of those things, but a book that was just like, here's how you manage. And so I was so excited to get the book. I got the book, and as soon as I looked at the cover, I stepped back. I had to look at it again because on the cover of management books in those days, what you always saw was like a CEO with perfectly combed hair and a suit and arms folded, and it looked like guys flew in from Hollywood to take the picture and all that. But on Andy's book, he's dressed for work. He's in front of the Intel sign, and hanging from his belt is his key card. And I do a double take. I'm like, he didn't take his key card off for the cover of the book? That's amazing. He was so ready to go back to work, he didn't even take his key card off. But in retrospect, that cover was perfect because Andy Grove was all substance. And he wrote that book for us to teach us how to run our organizations better. But if we needed a fancy cover to read it, that was our loss. And this book wasn't for people who wanted to look the part. This book was for the people who wanted to live the part. And when I read it, it was so amazing as a management book because it connected not just intellectually, but emotionally with what the whole thing was about. And reading it, you could just feel what he wanted you to learn. And he did it by exposing, even as the most important guy in the whole industry, his own vulnerabilities. You could see that he knew what was hard about it. There's a great passage in the book where he talks about, when people come late for a meeting, and you know that that's not good because it's going to waste everybody's time in the room. But what you don't know as a young manager is how do you deal with that person when they come in the room? Because that's a very awkward situation. And Andy Grove, Andy went through and he explained what it feels like, how to deal with it. And you knew that he felt that, and he had to think through, okay, this is why I'm going to tell that person they can't be late. And it was just such an amazing feeling, and it was one of those books where when you read it, he put so much of himself into it that after finishing it, I felt like I knew him better than people who I actually knew. And so after reading it, maybe 6 or 7 years later, my now business partner, Mark Andreessen, comes to me and says, hey, Ben, would you like to meet Andy Grove? And I was, of course, freaking out. I was like, oh, my God, Andy Grove. I can't believe it. I was still the most excited I've ever been to meet anybody in my life. And, when you get something like that, the next thing you have to think of is, what am I going to say? And I thought, the one thing I'm definitely going to say is I'm going to tell him how much I like the book. So we go in for the meeting, and first sentence out of my mouth, Andy, I loved your book. It's my favorite book I've ever read. And he looked at me and he said, why? And I totally didn't expect that. I was expecting thank you, so honored, it's awesome. But he's, why? And I should have expected it because that was Andy. He was always teaching, and he was always expecting more from every student of his. And so, but there I was, flipping through my mind, why, I got to come up with an answer because otherwise he's going to think I didn't even read the book. And I finally said, every management book I've read, they just deal with these trivial things that I could have figured out myself. But your book deals with the real issues. And, and he looked at me and you could kind of see his face soften and he was like, okay, that's okay. And those of you who know Andy probably have had this experience many times. The conversation kind of went on. And then he said, Ben, that thing that you were saying about management books, he said, it's interesting because I recently ran out of space on my bookshelf at home. And I thought to myself, should I buy a bigger house or should I get rid of some books? And I thought, easy decision. But which books to get rid of? And then I thought, the management books. But I had this problem, which is almost every management book that I had was given to me by the author. And the author had inscribed a very nice note to me about how I might have helped them or something, and I felt horrible throwing away these notes. So what I did was I opened up each book, I tore out the page with the inscription, and put it to the side, and I threw out the book. And so now I have this nice stack of very nice inscriptions and plenty of space on my shelf for good books. And that story, I don't know that anybody other than Andy Grove would have a story like that, because that was him. You know, he had such high expectations and high standards for all his students. He wanted only the greatest. But at the same time, he had an undying belief in the underlying person. So, yeah, you had to be good to make it onto Andy Grove's bookshelf. You had to be great. You had to work. You had to earn your way up there. But even if you didn't make it, it still meant something to him that you wrote him that nice note and that you really tried and you wanted him to have the book. And maybe one day you'd make it onto the bookshelf. And it's just something that is so powerful, to expect so much of people, but yet to care about them that much. And you almost never see it, and he's such a special person for that. And we're here today to honor Andy, and I think that the best way to honor him is to live up to his standard, or to try to live up to his standard. And that means when we see someone who comes to us with nothing, who just wants to do something, we need to help them. But we need to help them with a high expectation of not only what they're going to do, but who they're going to help. And even if they don't make it, it's so important that they know that we still care about them. And even more important than that, if a political refugee happens to show up on our shores, we need to embrace her with everything we have, because she may be the next Andy Grove. Thank you. Can you show the video? Can you see the next video?
Andy Grove is the quintessential manager of our time. He is absolutely the best. Above all else, he's an extraordinarily inspirational figure, one of the most influential people of our time, I would say. If he takes something on, he does it with all his heart and soul.
I think Andy built Silicon Valley. Kind of, if you pick one person who built Silicon Valley, it was Andy, and some of that had to do with the role that Intel played. Andy kind of exemplifies the best of Silicon Valley, and Andy kind of set the model for what a high-quality Silicon Valley company could be.
I think he's one of the men who's made this great Silicon Valley, and without a doubt responsible for the most important high-technology company ever.
I was very surprised when I met Andy and seeing a warm and caring, very inspirational human being come into my office, and by the time he left my office, we were hugging.
I first met Andy after a series of pretty hard times at Facebook, when a lot of people in his position wouldn't take the time to see me, and he was always so generous.
I couldn't believe it when we were finally set up for lunch and we went down. So I was like a little bit of a fanboy and trying to hide it. He was familiar with Dropbox, and he gave me a little bit of a grilling about us and the cloud and the NSA and things like that. So he was very direct, which wasn't surprising, but we had a great conversation.
It's a little bit like, somebody saying, "Boy, you should ask Jesus if you should, if he'll see you once a quarter," or something like that.
I became the CEO of Intuit. I asked him if he could help me a little bit, and he volunteered the time to come to my office and sit down and talk to me a number of times. And he told me about those things that he felt were important. He made such a big deal. If I trained my managers, my company would be better.
I really have enormous appreciation for Andy's perspective. I've very much appreciated that he's taken me under his wing as a mentor in doing something like this that is so big and different from the types of things that I've done in the past.
We wrote a case study, which is still being used, by the way, here as well as at Harvard Business School, when the first time he came to my class, right? So that was, he told me, I like to come and see once how it goes. So you bring in some guy like Grove, and you might lose control of your class in no time. And I told him, in the class, I am the boss. If you come and teach with me, at Intel, you're the boss. But in my class, I am the boss. So if you challenge me, I'm going to challenge you. And for 24 years, we have done it. We've actually done it.
He wills with every fiber of his being for the success of the organization. He had the same kind of way that Steve Jobs did of getting really high performance out of people.
His book really played a big role in shaping my management style as well. My wife just finished her residency program and is now a new entrepreneur. And when she started and asked me what she should do to learn, reading his book was my only real suggestion.
I'm just really grateful that he's taken the time to put all this down in writing. He acknowledges reality and doesn't oversimplify things. Just every year I find myself coming back to a lot of the lessons that he's written down.
His high output management book is a Bible that every entrepreneur, every manager in the country should look at, read and understand, and make sure that they can apply those principles.
If I had to pick one word to describe Andy, it would be builder. And I mean that both as a builder of technology, but also as a builder of companies and a builder of cultures.
Andy is ruthlessly intellectually honest, kind of a cross between a father and a mentor and a hero.
He was very loyal to Intel. He was loyal to UCSF, and he's a loyal friend, I know. And yet, for all he's achieved, he's an unassuming individual.
I've seldom come across people who have that ability to be so clear and then, based on that insight, to take action.
He's confident and vulnerable at the same time, and I think that's probably why he's been an amazing leader in so many different arenas. He's a very forthright and lovely man.
Ladies and gentlemen, Andy Grove.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
One item, food for thought, as we sit here and go through what each of us have done, our colleagues have done, my contemporaries have done. Let's remember that millions of young people who had the misfortune of being born in the wrong national boundaries are going through all the horrors that Ben described. I had to. I made it. let's try in a little way to help them make it.
Wow. So let me just close with a couple of thoughts here. When Karen introduced us tonight, she made the point that, the awards are not about patting ourselves on the back. And when I was talking with Ed, he made the same point at Pixar, that these debriefs are not about patting ourselves on the back. And so we've heard 4 amazing stories tonight, and here's what I think we take away. We take away that we need better diagnostics and better therapies to help us detect and address diseases sooner. We need better stories to help us decode life and decode the challenges and the challenges that Andy just referred to that are striking our whole planet. We need better jobs, better education, better access to employ the broad swath of our population, which is being dislocated and disoriented by the very technology that we're created. Most of all, we need to take the leadership that Andy and others demonstrate into ourselves and take it with us when we leave here tonight. So I think it's very important you were here tonight, and I hope you take that away with you. And on behalf of the Churchill Club, I want to say thank you and good night.